Hello, my name is Axel Stone, 29 years old. I am the founder of Stone Ventures, an investment fund with total capital of approximately $30 million. I live in Minnesota, a place of vast forests and shimmering lakes that look like paradise. This is not only my hometown, but also the place that holds my most beautiful memories and my deepest wounds. I am the son of a renowned lawyer, a man respected by the entire city of Minneapolis. But to me, he is not a hero. Rather, he is a large shadow that has always weighed heavily on my life. And then there is my twin brother, Ryder, someone I both love and resent, want to protect yet also surpass. This is my story of the days I fought to find myself amidst love, injustice, and harsh lessons from family. I was born into a family that everyone considered perfect. My father, Richard Stone, is a brilliant lawyer who built a legal empire from nothing. He owns one of the largest law firms in the state, serving clients like massive corporations and powerful politicians. My father is tall, with a deep, warm yet chilling voice and eyes that always seem to be evaluating everything around him. He is someone you never want to argue with, as he always has a way of making you feel small. I grew up in his shadow, and every step I took seemed to require his approval. My mother, Elizabeth, is a gentle but strong woman. Before marrying my father, she was the heiress of a wealthy family in Chicago. She gave up her career to become a wife, a mother, and the heart of our family. She has golden blonde hair, deep blue eyes that always radiate warmth, and a smile that can soothe even the storms in my heart. My mother loves me and Ryder unconditionally, but I always sensed her helplessness when caught between me and my father. She tried to be a bridge, but the cracks in our family were too deep for anyone to mend. Ryder, my twin brother, is a completely different version of me, even though we share identical faces. He has neatly combed light brown hair, a radiant smile like sunshine, and a way of speaking that captivates everyone. Ryder is charming, diplomatic, and always knows how to please others. He is the one my father favors, not just for his personality, but because Ryder knows how to make my father proud. Meanwhile, I am straightforward, sometimes too blunt, and never hesitate to confront my father when I think he's wrong. Perhaps that's why my father and I are like two poles of a magnet, constantly repelling each other. Our house is in an affluent neighborhood in Edina, a sprawling mansion with floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking a small, glistening lake. Inside, everything is luxurious. Polished wooden floors, expensive paintings hung on the walls, and the faint scent of costly perfume lingering in the air. But to me, that house is not a home. It feels more like a stage where each family member plays a role, and I am always the odd one out. When we were young, Ryder and I were inseparable, like two sides of the same coin. We played together in the backyard, built sandcastles by the lake, and dreamed of grand adventures. But as we grew older, I began to notice the differences between us. Ryder always knew how to make my father laugh, make my mother proud, and win everyone's affection. He could tell a well-timed joke or say sweet words that melted hearts. I couldn't. I preferred to speak the truth even if it hurt someone. My father called it stubbornness, but I called it honesty. I remember one time when I was about 10 years old, my father hosted a grand party at our house to entertain his business partners. Ryder went around, shaking hands with everyone, flashing his perfect smile and telling amusing stories he'd picked up somewhere. The guests burst into laughter, patted his shoulder, and said he would grow up to be an outstanding man. Meanwhile, I sat in a corner of the room reading a book about the stock market I'd borrowed from the library. My father passed by and looked at me with disappointment. "Axel, why aren't you out there talking to people? Are you going to sit here all night like some eccentric?" I looked up and replied, "I don't like pretending, Dad." He shook his head, walked away, and I felt my heart constrict. My mother was the only one who understood me. After that party, she sat beside me on the sofa, stroked my hair, and said, "You don't have to be like anyone else, Axel. You are you, and I love you for that." Her words were like a small flame, warming my heart during the coldest days. But no matter how hard she tried, I still felt like an outsider in my own family. My happiest moments weren't in that luxurious house, but at my grandparents' small log cabin near a forest in northern Minnesota. My grandfather, Henry, was once a lumberjack, a tall man with rough hands and a warm smile. He had silver white hair and bright eyes that seemed to hold an entire world of secrets. He loved me, not because I was talented or charming, but because he saw a part of himself in me. Strength, honesty, and a touch of stubbornness. Every summer, Ryder and I were sent to our grandparents' house for a few weeks. For me, it was paradise. I woke up at dawn, followed my grandfather into the forest where he taught me how to identify trees, listen to the wind, and find my way home when lost. He told me stories about the deep woods, lone wolves, and men who fought their inner battles to find meaning in life. "Axel," he once said, "life is like a forest. Sometimes you'll get lost, but if you keep your heart true, you'll always find the light." Ryder, on the other hand, didn't like the forest. He preferred staying indoors, playing chess with our grandmother, or telling funny stories to make her laugh. He always knew how to make her happy, and I didn't blame him for that. But sometimes I felt jealous. Ryder could make people love him effortlessly, while I had to fight every day to be acknowledged. My grandmother, Margaret, was a petite but strong woman. She wore her hair in a high bun, had warm brown eyes, and a voice as soothing as a lullaby. She loved both of us, but I knew she worried about me more. "Axel, you have a big heart," she once said, "but you need to learn to protect it. Not everyone will understand you." Her words were like a prophecy because as I grew older, I realized my family wasn't a place where I could find peace. When Ryder and I turned 15, the tension between me and my father became more pronounced. One evening during a family dinner, my father announced that he wanted us to attend a prestigious boarding school in Boston. I objected immediately. "I don't want to leave Minnesota, Dad. I want to stay here, near Grandma and Grandpa, near Mom." My father looked at me, his eyes cold as ice. "Axel, you need to learn to live in the real world. You can't always be a dreamy boy in the forest." I gripped my knife tightly, trying to suppress my anger. "I'm not dreaming. I just want to live true to myself." As usual, Ryder stepped in to smooth things over. "Dad, I think that school would be great for both of us. Axel just needs time to get used to the idea." He gave me a reassuring smile, but I only saw pretense. I knew Ryder didn't really care about the boarding school. He just wanted to please our father. My mother placed her hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Everything will be okay, Axel." But I knew nothing was okay. In the end, I didn't have to go to Boston thanks to my mother convincing my father. But from then on, my relationship with him grew even more strained. He looked at me like a failure, a son who couldn't meet his expectations. Ryder, on the other hand, became increasingly favored. He became my father's pride, while I became a thorn in his side. When I was 18, Ryder and I both got accepted into a prestigious economics university in Minneapolis. It was a turning point in my life, but it also made me realize that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. My father agreed to pay tuition for both of us, but he said something to me that I'll never forget. "Axel, I won't hold your hand like I do with Ryder. If you want to prove who you are, do it yourself." Those words cut like a knife, but they also ignited a fierce determination in me. I swore to myself that I wouldn't rely on my father or anyone else. I would build my own life, and one day I would make him look at me with a different gaze. Not one of disappointment, but one of respect. In the fall of my 18th year, I stepped into the University of Minnesota, a prestigious institution for economics where grand dreams were sown and ambitions forged. The sprawling campus, with its historic red brick buildings draped in ivy, cobblestone paths shaded by oak trees, and an atmosphere buzzing with the excitement of young students, was more than just a place to study for me. It was a battlefield to prove my worth. Ryder enrolled alongside me, and though we were once inseparable, I knew that from here on each of us would walk our own path. Our father paid tuition for both of us, but his support for me ended there. For Ryder, he provided a monthly allowance, bought him a new car for easy commuting, and even introduced him to some of his business connections. Ryder needs relationships to succeed, my father said during a family dinner, his tone casual as if it were obvious. I sat across from him, gripping my glass tightly, trying to suppress the rising anger. "What about me, Dad?" I asked, my voice slightly trembling. He looked at me, his eyes cold. "What do you want, Axel? I've paid your tuition. Don't ask for more." My mother placed her hand on my thigh under the table, a silent gesture as if to say she understood. But her comfort couldn't erase the feeling of abandonment. I knew my father didn't believe I could succeed. He thought I was too rigid, too stubborn, and not savvy enough to survive in the volatile world of business. And I was determined to prove him wrong. I began my college journey with a mindset different from Ryder's. While he joined student clubs, attended lavish parties, and built a network of connections, I threw myself into studying and working part-time. I found a job at the university library, shelving books and helping students find resources. The job wasn't glamorous and the pay barely covered my food and textbooks, but it gave me a sense of freedom. I didn't need to ask my father for money or bow to anyone. Every evening, I sat in a corner of the library, reading books on the stock market, financial analysis, and investment strategies. Numbers, charts, and market trends became my world, a place where I could control things and no one judged me. Ryder, in contrast, lived a far more dazzling life. He quickly became a star among student groups, always invited to important events and even selected by a renowned economics professor to be a research assistant. I overheard people whispering about him in the hallways. "Ryder Stone is truly talented. He's going to make it big." Each time I heard those words, I felt a mix of pride and bitterness. Pride because Ryder was my brother. Bitterness because I knew much of his success came from our father's support and the natural charm I lacked. One winter evening during our freshman year, Ryder and I sat across from each other in the campus cafeteria. Outside, snow fell heavily, blanketing the campus in white. Ryder wore an expensive cashmere sweater our father had given him, while I had on an old, worn-out jacket. He looked at me, flashing his familiar smile. "Axel, why don't you join the Young Entrepreneurs Club with me? There are some people worth meeting. They could help you later." I took a sip of my cold coffee and replied, "I don't need those connections, Ryder. I want to do things on my own." He shrugged, smiling lightly. "You're so stubborn. I just want what's best for you." I knew Ryder didn't mean any harm, but his words felt like a slap. He didn't understand that I didn't want to follow his path, the one paved by our father where everything came easier. I wanted to carve my own way, no matter how rough it was. In my sophomore year, I started investing in the stock market with the meager savings from my part-time job. I opened an online trading account, spending hours researching companies, analyzing financial reports, and predicting market trends. The first time I bought stocks, my heart pounded as if I were betting my entire life. I chose a small tech company, believing their product would take off in a few years. 3 months later, the stock doubled and I made a $500 profit. It wasn't much, but to me it was my first victory. Proof that I could achieve something without my father's help. Meanwhile, Ryder focused on building his personal brand. He joined a startup project with some wealthy friends, creating an app to connect small businesses with investors. Our father provided him with initial capital, and I heard from my mother that he even hired a legal advisor to help Ryder refine his business plan. I wasn't surprised, but it still stung. My father never asked about what I was doing, never showed interest in my passion for the stock market. To him, I was just a stubborn kid, not worth investing in. My mother was the only one who always stood by me. Every weekend I came home for family dinners, and she always found a way to talk to me privately. Once she handed me a box of homemade cookies, her eyes gleaming with pride. "Axel, I heard you're investing in stocks. You're doing great, my son." I smiled, feeling warmth spread through me. "I'm just trying things out, Mom. I'm not great yet. She took my hand, her voice gentle. You don't need to be great right now. You just need to be you. I believe you'll do big things. Her words were like a breeze blowing away the doubts in my heart. But my father was different. One evening, when I casually mentioned my stock investments during a family dinner, he scoffed. Stocks? You think you can beat the market, Axel? It's a game of chance, not a place for stubborn kids like you. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to stay calm. I'm not gambling, Dad. I research, I analyze, and I know what I'm doing. He looked at me, his gaze icy. What do you know? You're too young, too arrogant. If you fail, don't expect me to bail you out. My mother interjected, her voice worried. Richard, Axel is trying. You should support him. But my father just shook his head and turned to ask Ryder about his startup, as if I didn't exist. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just fighting to prove myself, but also battling my father's doubts. He didn't believe in me, and perhaps he never would. But instead of letting that drag me down, I turned it into motivation. I vowed to succeed, not to please my father, but to prove I didn't need his approval to become a man. By my junior year, I started seeing small successes in investing. I built a stock portfolio worth $5,000, mostly from profits of previous trades. I also joined an investment club at school where I learned from other students and shared my knowledge. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere, where people respected me for my skills, not my last name or connections. A professor in the club, Mr. Thompson, noticed my potential. One afternoon, he called me into his office and handed me a book on value investing. Axel, you have good instincts, he said. But to succeed, you need patience. Don't let emotions drive you. I nodded, feeling like I'd found a mentor. Meanwhile, Ryder continued to shine. His startup caught the attention of a venture capital fund, and he appeared in a student newspaper with the headline, University of Minnesota Student and His $1 Million Dream. I read the article in the library, my heart torn between pride and envy. Ryder wasn't just succeeding. He was doing it effortlessly, as if everything was preordained. I wondered if I was on the wrong path, if my persistence was just foolishness. 4 years of college passed in a blink, and Ryder and I both graduated with honors. On graduation day, I stood among the crowd, watching my parents clap from the stands. My mother beamed with a radiant smile, while my father only nodded slightly, his face expressionless. After the ceremony, he patted Ryder's shoulder and said, I'm proud of you, son. Then he looked at me and said only, Good job, Axel. Nothing more, nothing less. I forced a smile, but inside a storm raged. I had done everything to prove myself, but to my father, I was still a faint shadow next to Ryder. That evening at the graduation celebration at home, my father called Ryder and me into his study. He sat behind his large wooden desk, hands clasped, his tone serious. Ryder, I'll support you in starting your company, $1 million plus advice from my partners. You're ready to step into the real world. Ryder nodded, his eyes gleaming. Thank you, Dad. I won't let you down. Then my father turned to me. Axel, what do you want to do? But whatever it is, remember, I won't support you. You have to stand on your own, as you've always said. I looked him straight in the eye, my voice firm. I'll work in the stock market. I don't need anything but myself. My father raised an eyebrow, as if surprised by my confidence. Good, but don't expect me to save you if you fail. I nodded, walked out of the room, feeling both relieved and hurt. My father didn't believe in me, but I didn't need him to. I believed in myself, and that was what mattered most. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of the familiar room I'd known since childhood. The white-painted walls, the bookshelf filled with finance books, and the wooden desk where I'd spent countless hours studying the stock market. All were familiar, but now they felt like relics of a closed chapter. I knew I couldn't stay in this house any longer. Not because I hated my father or because I didn't love my mother and Ryder, but because I needed a space to breathe, to become the Axel Stone I wanted to be. Not the version my father expected, nor a shadow of Ryder. The next morning I packed my things. Just an old suitcase, a few clothes, my laptop, and a stack of investment books. My mother stood at the door of my room, her eyes red. "Are you sure you want to go, Axel?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to do this, Mom. I can't stay here and feel like I don't belong." She hugged me tightly, her warm breath on my shoulder. "You'll always have me no matter where you are," she whispered. I knew my mother loved me, but her love couldn't bridge the gap between me and my father. My father wasn't home when I left. He was at his office as usual, busy with multi-million-dollar lawsuits. I wasn't surprised, but I still felt a sharp pang in my heart. I left a note on the dining table. "I'm leaving to find my own path. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for everything." I wasn't sure if my father would read it, but I needed to do it, as a way to close the old chapter of my life. I rented a small apartment in downtown Minneapolis near the financial district. The apartment was barely 40 square meters with a cramped bedroom, a worn-out kitchen corner, and a window overlooking a noisy street. The walls were peeling. The wooden floor creaked with every step, but to me it was paradise. For the first time in my life, I had a place that was mine, where I didn't have to live up to anyone's expectations. The savings from my college part-time job could only sustain me for a few months. I knew I needed to find work immediately. I sent resumes to dozens of securities firms, from large corporations to small investment funds. But the job market wasn't kind to a fresh graduate like me. Most companies required experience, which I lacked, or connections, which I refused to seek through my father or anyone else. I got a few interview calls, but most ended with polite rejections. "You have potential, but we need someone with more experience." Those early days in Minneapolis were tough. I lived on instant noodles, cheap coffee, and restless sleep. Every morning I woke up at 5 a.m., sat in front of my laptop to analyze the market, hoping to make a little money from my small investment portfolio. But the market didn't always favor me. Once I bet on an energy company, believing its stock would rise. Then an unfavorable report came out and I lost nearly $1,000, enough to cover 2 months' rent. I sat in my cold apartment, staring at the red screen, feeling like the world was mocking me. But then I took a deep breath, remembering my grandfather's words. "The forest is never easy, Axel, but you have to keep going." After 3 months of persistence, I finally got a job offer from a small securities firm called Blue Wave Investments. The position was only an analyst assistant, with a salary just enough to get by, but it was a first step. On my first day, I wore an old suit, looked in the mirror, and told myself, "You can do this, Axel." The company was in a modern glass building filled with men and women in suits hurrying about. I felt out of place, but also excited. This was my world where I could prove my worth. The job wasn't as glamorous as I'd imagined. I spent most of my time entering data, running simple financial models, and doing miscellaneous tasks for senior analysts. But I learned a lot: how to read earnings reports, assess risks, and stay calm when the market crashed. I worked 14-hour days, sometimes weekends, just to keep up. My colleagues, mostly older than me, initially paid me little attention. But gradually they noticed I wasn't just a dreamy young guy. Once I spotted an error in a report about a tech company, and my suggestion helped the firm avoid a significant loss. My boss, a stern man named Daniel, patted my shoulder and said, "Good work, Axel." That praise was like a spark, igniting my belief that I was on the right path. Life slowly stabilized, but I still felt empty. I rarely contacted my family. My mother called every week, updating me about Ryder and his successes. His startup was growing thanks to my father's investment and the connections he provided. "Ryder just signed a big contract," she said, her voice proud. "How about you, Axel? Are you okay?" I smiled over the phone, hiding my bitterness. "I'm fine, Mom. I'm doing what I love." But after hanging up, I sat in the dark wondering if I was fighting a pointless battle to chase Ryder's shadow. I didn't visit home often, not because I didn't miss my mother, but because I dreaded facing my father. On the rare occasions I did, I stayed only a few hours. My father didn't ask about my job, only making small talk. Ryder tried to draw me into conversations, but I kept my distance. I didn't blame him, but I couldn't stand the feeling of being compared, even unintentionally. Instead, I frequently visited my grandparents. Their small log cabin, nestled among endless pine forests, was the only place I felt at peace. But each visit I noticed my grandfather growing weaker. He was still tall, still had his warm smile, but his steps were slower and he coughed often when it was cold. My grandmother said he had chronic pneumonia, a consequence of years as a lumberjack and biting cold. I was worried, but he always brushed it off. "Don't look at me like that, Axel," he said, laughing hoarsely. "I'm old. Sickness is normal, but I'm proud of you. You're living true as I taught you." Afternoon at my grandparents' house, my grandfather and I sat by the fireplace, listening to the crackling wood. He told me old stories about the deep forest, about the days he fought to provide for his family. "You're like me, Axel," he said once, his eyes gleaming. "You have a strong heart, but it's also vulnerable. Don't let the world make you forget who you are." I nodded, feeling a deep connection with him. My grandfather wasn't just family, he was my mentor, my guide. One freezing winter day while I was at the office, my grandmother called. Her voice trembled. "Axel, your grandfather, he's very weak. Can you come?" I dropped everything and drove 3 hours from Minneapolis to their house. When I arrived, my grandfather was lying in bed, his face pale, his breathing labored. I held his hand, feeling the roughness of the fingers that once taught me to hold an axe, to read tracks in the forest. "Grandpa," I whispered, tears welling up. He smiled weakly. "Don't cry, Axel, you're a strong man. Keep your heart true as I taught you." I nodded, but my heart felt like it was shattering. A few days later, my father decided to have my grandfather admitted to the hospital for medical care, despite knowing my grandfather didn't want it. My grandmother, my father, and my mother took turns staying with him. I visited every evening after work. About 2 weeks after his admission, my grandfather passed away. The night he left, I sat by the hospital window watching the snow fall, feeling like the world had collapsed. He was the only one who always believed in me, who saw the real me. Losing him felt like losing a part of my soul. The white snowflakes swirled outside the glass, falling onto the quiet streets of Minneapolis, and I wondered if he was out there somewhere, in the wind, in the forest, watching me as he did when I was a child. I clutched the wooden necklace he gave me when I was 10, a piece of pine carved with a wolf, a symbol of resilience and freedom. "You're a wolf, Axel," he once said. "Don't let anyone cage you." The days that followed were like a haze. Work at Blue Wave Investments continued, but I went through the motions like a machine. I analyzed reports, entered data, attended meetings, but my mind kept drifting back to the wooden cabin in the forest, to my grandfather's hoarse laugh, to the afternoons he taught me how to read animal tracks. Every time I thought of him, my chest tightened, as if someone were squeezing my heart. 4 days after my grandfather passed away, my grandmother called, her voice frail but trying to stay composed. "Axel, can you come? We're preparing for your grandfather's funeral." I took a few days off work and drove to the wooden house in northern Minnesota. The familiar road, lined with towering pines and the faint scent of resin, now carried an indescribable sadness. When I arrived, my grandmother stood on the porch, her eyes red but still wearing a gentle smile. "You're here," she said, hugging me tightly. I held her close, feeling the fragility of her body. My grandmother was always strong, but I knew that losing my grandfather meant she was enduring a silent pain. My grandfather's funeral was held in a small church near the forest. The air was freezing and everyone's breath formed white clouds in the sky. My family was there in full. My mother, her face somber but trying to remain calm. Ryder in an elegant black suit, his eyes pensive, and my father standing tall, his face devoid of emotion. Townspeople also came, those who had worked with my grandfather, who had listened to his stories by the fireplace. They hugged me, offered words of comfort, and shared memories of him. The strong lumberjack, the man who always helped others without expecting anything in return. I stood before my grandfather's coffin, looking at his face for the last time. He looked peaceful, as if asleep, but I knew he was gone forever. I placed my hand on his chest and whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa, for everything." My mother stood beside me, holding my hand, tears silently falling. Ryder stood behind, saying nothing, but I felt his presence. My father, as usual, kept his distance, his gaze fixed somewhere far off, as if thinking of something more important than his own father's funeral. After the funeral, the family was summoned to a lawyer's office in town to hear the reading of the will. I didn't expect much. To me, my grandfather had already given me so much: his lessons, his stories, and the belief that I could be myself. I assumed he would leave the wooden cabin to my grandmother and perhaps some savings for the family. But when I stepped into the lawyer's office, a small room with the smell of old wood and dusty bookshelves, I sensed an odd tension in the air. We sat around a long wooden table, me, my mother, my father, Ryder, and my grandmother. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was an elderly man with white hair and round glasses. He opened a brown envelope, his voice steady as he began to read. This will was drafted by Mr. Henry Stone on October 15, 2020, in the presence of 2 witnesses. I gazed distractedly out the window where pine branches swayed in the wind until Mr. Peterson's voice sharpened. The entirety of Mr. Henry Stone's investment portfolio, currently valued at approximately $5 million, is bequeathed to Axel Stone. The room seemed to stop breathing. I turned, feeling the blood rush to my head. $5 million? My grandfather had an investment portfolio? I had never heard him mention it. I looked at my grandmother, hoping for answers, but she only smiled faintly, as if she had known all along. My mother squeezed my hand, her eyes sparkling with pride. Ryder sat across from me, his hands clenched, his face stiff. My father furrowed his brow, his icy gaze fixed on Mr. Peterson. "What?" he said, his voice low but laced with anger. "My father had a $5 million portfolio? And it's all going to Axel? Nothing for anyone else?" Mr. Peterson calmly adjusted his glasses and continued reading. Mr. Henry also left a letter for Axel. He handed me a small, carefully sealed envelope. I opened it, my hands trembling, and read my grandfather's handwritten words, his script strong yet full of warmth. "Axel, my grandson, you are the one I trust most. You have the resilience and honesty I always cherished. This portfolio is the work of my lifetime, not for boasting, but to build a future. I know you will use it to create something great, not just for yourself, but for the values I taught you. Don't let anyone sway you. Be the strong wolf you've always been." Tears fell, soaking the letter. I felt as if my grandfather were right there beside me, still guiding me as he always had. But when I looked up, I saw my father's eyes, a mix of anger and disappointment. "This isn't fair," he said, his voice cold as ice. "My father left everything to Axel. A stubborn kid with no experience. I'm his son. I deserve a share of it." Ryder said nothing, but I noticed his hands trembling slightly. My mother gripped my hand tighter, as if shielding me from the storm about to break. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat, trying to ease the tension. "This is Mr. Henry's wish, Mr. Richard. The will was drafted legally with witnesses. No one can change it." My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "His wish? This is favoritism. Axel isn't capable of managing that money. He'll ruin everything." I looked at my father, my heart aching. "You think I'm not capable?" I asked, my voice calm but sharp. "Grandpa believed in me. Why can't you?" My father stared at me, his gaze piercing. "Because you're not Ryder," he said, his voice dripping with bitterness. "You don't have the finesse, the vision. You're just a stubborn kid and my father was wrong to put his faith in you. His words cut like a knife, slicing deep into my heart. My mother stood, her voice trembling but resolute. Richard, that's enough. Axel is your son and you should be proud of him as your father was. My father turned away silent, but I saw his shoulders tremble slightly as if he were wrestling with himself. Ryder finally spoke, his voice calm but cold. Congratulations, Axel. You deserve it. But his eyes didn't match his words. I saw envy, hurt, and a hint of betrayal. I wanted to say something to explain that I hadn't expected this, but I knew words would be meaningless now. My grandmother, who had been silent throughout, stood up, her voice gentle but firm. Henry chose Axel because he saw the boy's heart. You may not understand, but respect his decision. She looked at my father, then Ryder, and finally at me. Axel, you know what you have to do. I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. The $5 million wasn't just wealth, it was my grandfather's legacy, his trust, his values, and the lessons he passed down to me. The reading of the will ended in tension. My father left without another word. My mother hugged me before following him to the car. Ryder patted my shoulder, offering a strained smile. Do well, Axel. Don't let Grandpa down. I nodded, but I knew things between me and Ryder, between me and my father, had changed forever. I returned to Minneapolis, carrying my grandfather's letter in a mix of pride and pressure. I didn't know how to manage such a vast sum, but I knew I couldn't fail. I sat in my small apartment, opened my laptop, and began studying my grandfather's portfolio. It was a carefully built collection of blue-chip stocks, bonds, and a few ETFs, assembled over years. I realized my grandfather wasn't just a lumberjack. He was a savvy investor who had quietly amassed a fortune no one in the family knew about. The weeks that followed were relentless. By day, I worked at Blue Wave, learning from senior analysts. By night, I studied my grandfather's portfolio, looking for ways to optimize it. I didn't want to just preserve the money, I wanted to grow it as my grandfather believed I could. But the pressure wasn't just from work. My father called a few times, his voice cold, demanding I share the wealth with the family. It's not just yours, Axel, he said. It's for the whole family. You can't be that selfish. I refused, not because I didn't want to share, but because I wanted to honor my grandfather's wishes. Grandpa left it to me, Dad, I replied. I won't betray his trust. One evening, I drove to my grandmother's house, bringing a bouquet of flowers to place on my grandfather's grave. I stood before the stone marker, the cold wind rustling through the pines. Grandpa, I whispered, I don't know if I can do this, but I promise I'll try my best. A tear rolled down my cheek, but I also felt a new strength rising within me. My grandfather had believed in me, and I wouldn't let him down. 4 years have passed since my grandfather's death, leaving me not only a $5 million investment portfolio, but also a tremendous responsibility to turn that legacy into something meaningful. Those 4 years were far from easy. There were nights I stayed up, eyes burning in front of the computer screen, analyzing hundreds of financial reports, predicting market trends, and wondering if I had the strength to keep my promise to my grandfather. There were moments I thought I'd collapse, when the market crashed or when family pressure weighed heavily on me. But each time I wanted to give up, I remembered my grandfather's letter, his powerful words, "Be your own wolf." And I kept fighting. I knew I couldn't just keep the money in a bank or invest it safely. My grandfather didn't leave me this fortune for an easy life. He wanted me to create something great, as he wrote. I realized that to grow it, I needed to take bigger risks, be smarter. I didn't just want to preserve the wealth, I wanted to multiply it to prove that my grandfather's faith in me wasn't misplaced. I continued working at Blue Wave Investments, where I learned the intricacies of the stock market from seasoned professionals. But I didn't want to remain an analyst assistant, working for others forever. I dreamed of my own investment fund, where I could make decisions freely, support new ideas, and create real value. The idea began to take root. After nearly 3 years, my portfolio grew from $5 million to $10 million, thanks to successful investments in a lithium battery manufacturer and an AI software startup. Early success gave me confidence, but also brought greater pressure. I knew I couldn't stop, not just for my grandfather, but because I wanted to prove I could do it without my father, without anyone. In the 3rd year, I decided to leave Blue Wave to start my own fund, naming it Stone Ventures as a tribute to my grandfather. I rented a small office in downtown Minneapolis, just big enough for 3 people. Me, Sarah, my co-founder, and a young assistant named Mia. We began with a mission to support small startups, especially those focused on sustainability and social innovation. I wanted Stone Ventures to be more than a profit-driven fund. I wanted it to be a legacy of value, as my grandfather had taught me. The first months of Stone Ventures were a true test. I had to find investors myself, pitch to people far more experienced, and compete with larger funds. Some meetings ended in blunt rejections with comments like, "You're too young, Axel. Your fund has no track record. Why should we trust you?" But I didn't give up. I remembered the days my grandfather led me into the forest, teaching me that the hardest paths often lead to the most beautiful places. I refined my plans, sought out promising startups, and built a reputation. Gradually, Stone Ventures gained attention. A startup we invested in, producing recycled materials, won a national award, drawing media interest. An article in Forbes called Stone Ventures a young fund with far-reaching vision. And I began receiving partnership offers from major investors. By the end of the 4th year, our portfolio had grown to over $30 million, a figure I hadn't dared dream of when I started. But more than the money, I was proud of building something that was mine, something no one could take away. In those 4 years, I kept my distance from my family, not because I didn't love them, but because I needed to protect my heart. My father stopped calling to demand I share the inheritance, but whenever we spoke, he always mentioned Ryder, subtly comparing us. "Ryder just opened a new branch in Chicago," he said during a rare family dinner I attended. "His company's growing fast. How about you, Axel?" I gave a faint smile, replying, "I'm fine, Dad. My work's going well?" But I didn't share details. I didn't want my father to view me through Ryder's lens or judge me based on what he thought I should do. My mother was the only one I stayed in regular contact with. She called weekly, sent me homemade cookies, and always asked about Stone Ventures. "You make me proud, Axel," she said once, her voice warm over the phone. "I know you'll do great things." Her words were like a breeze, soothing the wounds in my heart. I also visited my grandmother often, bringing flowers to my grandfather's grave and sitting with her, listening to her stories about him. My grandmother grew frailer, but her eyes still sparkled when she looked at me. "You're Henry's pride," she said, holding my hand. "Never forget that." Ryder, meanwhile, continued to shine in his world, at least outwardly. His startup, an app connecting businesses, had raised tens of millions from investors. My father constantly boasted about Ryder at family gatherings, calling him the heir of the Stone family. But through my mother, I learned Ryder was struggling. He expanded his company too quickly, lacking a long-term vision, and some investors were pulling out. I wasn't pleased to hear this, but I wasn't surprised. Ryder was always skilled at building an image, but he relied too much on my father and connections instead of facing challenges himself. One autumn afternoon, while I was at Stone Ventures' office reviewing a new startup's file, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Axel, your father wants to meet you," she said, her voice tinged with worry. "He says it's important." I frowned, sensing something ominous. "What's it about, Mom?" She hesitated. "I'm not sure, but it's about Ryder. His company's in trouble." I fell silent, feeling a storm approaching. "I'll come," I said, though I dreaded the confrontation. That evening, I drove to the old house in Edina. The mansion was as it always was, with large glass windows and warm golden lights, but it no longer felt like home. My father sat in his study behind the familiar wooden desk. Ryder was there, looking more tired than I remembered. He was still handsome, but his eyes lacked the radiant spark of before. My mother stood near the door watching me with concern. My father got straight to the point. Axel, Ryder's company needs capital. A major investor just pulled out and we need to fill the gap. He looked at me, his eyes no longer cold but carrying a hint of pleading. You have Stone Ventures. You can help Ryder. I looked at my father, then at Ryder, my heart pounding. You want me to invest in Ryder's company? I asked, my voice calm but sharp. Ryder spoke, his voice hoarse. Axel, I know we're not as close as we used to be, but I need you. This company is everything I have. I looked at him, seeing the desperation in his eyes, and part of me wanted to help. But another part, the part that had endured my father's favoritism, the constant comparisons to Ryder, couldn't stay silent. Ryder, I don't blame you, I said. But you had Dad, you had connections, you had everything I didn't. Now you want me to save you? Do you think that's fair to me? My father slammed the desk, his voice furious. Axel, don't be selfish. This is family. You have $5 million inherited from my father, and you can't share a little with your brother? I stood looking straight into his eyes. That's not your money or the family's. It's Grandpa's legacy, and he trusted me with it. I've grown it with my own effort. I don't owe anyone anything. The room's atmosphere was thick, ready to explode. My mother stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. Axel, calm down. We can talk. But I shook my head, turning to Ryder. I'll introduce you to a financial advisor. They can help you restructure your company, but I can't invest, Ryder. You need to stand on your own like I did. Ryder nodded, his eyes a mix of gratitude and hurt. My father looked at me, his gaze full of disappointment. You're not the man I thought you were, Axel, he said. I gave a faint smile. I don't need you to think I'm anyone. I know who I am. I left that house feeling both relieved and pained. I had chosen to protect my grandfather's legacy, to protect myself, but I knew I'd lost a part of my family. On the drive back to Minneapolis, I pulled over by a forest, stepped out and stood under a starry sky. The wind carried the familiar scent of pine. I closed my eyes, feeling as if my grandfather were somewhere out there, smiling at me. I'm doing the right thing, Grandpa, I whispered. I'll keep going. Over the past 4 years, I didn't just grow my grandfather's wealth, I grew myself. Stone Ventures isn't just an investment fund, it's proof that I can stand tall despite my father's doubts, my rivalry with Ryder, and life's challenges. I've become the wolf my grandfather always believed I could be. Strong, honest, and free. And now, as I sit here recounting my life story with its scars and pride, I hope you find a spark of inspiration from the days I fought. I don't expect you to follow my path, but I wish you the courage to be yourself, the resilience to weather storms, and the faith to walk the road you choose no matter how rough. Live true like a wolf in the forest and never let anyone extinguish the fire in your heart.